All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Carnes, and this is the Dashboard Dojo. Hopefully you're in the right place. Today, we're going to talk about dashboard makeovers. So we'll do quick introductions. We'll dive into a set of topics. We'll talk a little bit about some upcoming OpFocus events and some OpFocus training. We've got an upcoming dojo in June where we'll try out a new format. I'll invite some folks who I think are absolute masters at dashboards and data in general, analytics, and we'll do an interview series. So the first guest I've known since I was a teenager is pretty amazing. We're not so formal. You're welcome to throw questions into the chat and we can try to address them as we go. So my name is David Carnes. I'm the chairman and chief evangelist of OpFocus. I'm honored to be part of the Salesforce MVP program. I've also watched Shawshank Redemption too many times, so I can't believe it's still at the top of the IMDb list. I think it's now neck and neck with The Godfather. So on the webinar today, we also have Kyle Shagnon, who's OpFocus's events manager.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for helping out, Kyle. So OpFocus, we're a consulting firm. We have a team of about 80. We're scattered across the US and Canada. We work with SaaS companies to optimize their revenue operations. Somehow, I'm in my 17th year working on the platform. We started the company 16 years ago. But let's dive in. All right, so I know many of you have been to the dojo before, but if you haven't, welcome. This idea of the dojo, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and the word's dojo, it's literally a place to learn the way. I visited a number of dojos around Japan while I lived there, and I just thought it was so great seeing people of different levels practicing and learning together. We do have lots of recordings on the dojo website. It's literally just dashboarddojo.com. There's a recordings link. One of them that's relevant to today is last fall, we did a session on dashboard components and went through each one of the components. So there are 11 types of components. And this idea of dashboard makeover is actually really helpful to know the components. So we're going to touch on each one of them today. I think that there are a lot of cases where somebody might have tried another component to get the data emphasized differently. All right. So before we get started, I just thought to share something kind of cool for me, but hopefully useful for you. Yesterday, the admin team published a blog article that I wrote about data analysis skill sets. So this is part of a 14-part series where a number of folks from around the world within the Salesforce Ohana wrote articles listing out different skill sets that they thought would be valuable for a Salesforce admin. I think, Kyle, you can pop that into the chat if you haven't already. So thank you for doing that. So the article, I'm just sort of reminiscing a bit of, some of the early jobs that I had, and then some experiences from being a consultant on the platform, things like having a glossary of terms and learning about the data structure and whatnot. But so that's that. All right, so for today, I don't know who this guy is, but I thought that was quite a makeover. I was looking around, maybe finding like a bungalow that had been changed into a McMansion or something like that, but I thought the most dramatic one seemed to be people. When we think about dashboard makeovers, we're thinking about a number of things, and probably one of the first things that should encourage you that this really shouldn't feel like it's hard is that we can clone any dashboard and we can make our own private copy of it and then tinker with that. We'll talk a little bit about the act of cloning and tinkering. But it's a really nice way to practice improving the curb appeal of your dashboard. I think of, there's kind of like different degrees of makeover, and probably the same is true within a house or within a person. This guy looks like he just got a haircut, maybe took a shower, and that's probably a lighter makeover. Whereas if he had like dental implants and other things, that would be a little bit heavier of a makeover. So as far as like a topical or surface makeover, we have 14 color palettes that we can choose from. We also have light or dark themes. We have the ability to resize components. We can arrange them on the page. We can introduce spacing. We can't introduce spacing vertically, but we can introduce spacing horizontally, sort of an interesting concept. One of the senior consultants on the OpFocus team loves, where possible, to group relevant components and actually introduce a space. Now, dashboards now in Lightning have 12 columns, so there isn't like a space in the middle necessarily, but maybe some of them could be sized and it can be just off center a little bit, that spacing. We can also adjust titles, subtitles, and footers. I think a lot of times we start with a report and we put it onto a dashboard, and the report title gets pulled in as the title of the dashboard component, but it doesn't always make sense. The same is true for subtitles and footers that people add that may not add any value. There were a few cases in preparing for today that just removing the footer, that was a meaningless footer that just told somebody to click on it to drill down. There's literally a link below it that a human can look at it and see that it's a link. They don't need to be told. But by removing that footer, suddenly the item, I think it was a metric component, suddenly it got so much bigger, what you were actually seeing on the screen. A couple of other things we might do, we might add filters. We might consider using dynamic dashboards. We've done dashboard Dōjō sessions on those. A couple of other things, we have two-level sorting. Now, this is something that doesn't exist on reports, the ability to sort twice, but it absolutely is a gift that we have on dashboards. And I think a lot of times when looking at dashboards that other people are creating, I'm seeing things that maybe are the dates are sort of right to left instead of left to right, or seeing things that might be a little bit more impactful if they were actually sorted or sorted even twice to really zero in on presenting that information. I mentioned components before. There are 11 types of components. What I see sometimes is somebody will create a report, put a chart on the report. Now on a report chart, you can only have 8 different options. But if you create your dashboards and you always use the source report chart, you're actually missing 3 of the types of charts that are available on a dashboard. So we have 11 on a dashboard. That might be a source of something that doesn't make sense. Also, I think that there are types of components that are really useful for certain scenarios, and we'll talk about those today. So as far as a structural makeover, something that I thought to point out is we can actually, while looking at a component on a dashboard, we can actually change the source report. So think of it as like redoing the plumbing. Now, when you doing the plumbing, you don't necessarily want to turn on the sink or flush. Well, we'll stop there. Turn on the sink. You don't want to move the pipes around because then the water is going to flood underneath. So you want to be kind of careful with that. It's going to force you to redo all the properties anyway. Another structural makeover that you might consider is actually splitting up a dashboard. So if you think of like the lifespan of a dashboard, and some dashboards, might be in use across years. You start out, you add a number of components to it, you have this base set, and then 6 months later, somebody says, I'd really like to see these 2 other metrics. And then someone a few months later says, I'd like to see these other 3 metrics. And suddenly you have this massive thing that may be really serving multiple purposes, and you could actually split it in half and actually, clone it and remove half from the other one. That may actually serve your needs better. Just because we can have 20 components on a dashboard doesn't mean that we should, and they really do feel busy when we have that many. Oh, so Jacqueline, I was just teasing earlier, so please don't worry at all. All right, so cloning. This idea of cloning, it's such an easy way to play and practice and try to improve the curb appeal. And you can pretty much do it with any dashboard, because you can clone a dashboard just by going up to the top right, choosing Save As from the action pull down. Now you have your own copy of it. Now just keep in mind that copy, you're not, if you make changes to that dashboard, you're not actually changing the underlying reports per se. And so we need to think a little bit more if we need to change the underlying report. So if there are no changes to the underlying reports and we're just trying to beautify it and make it a little bit more of a topical makeover, we can literally just use the Save As on the dashboard and just go to town, just start moving things around, changing, resizing, updating the things that we'll talk about.
And sorry, David, a question just came in. Is it possible to add a section heading to separate data within the dashboard?
Oh, great question. Thank you, Kyle. Great question, Jeff. Not at this time. So we did have the ability in Classic to add a header above the title and the subtitle, but we don't have that ability anymore. In Classic, what we also had was the ability to we could embed Visualforce pages, which you could do interesting things with that. So we don't have that ability in Lightning. So back to the cloning, if there are changes to the underlying reports, now you're sort of in a different category. So let's say that you know, ops director dashboard and moving things around and changing things lightly. And then there's another level entirely if you're structurally changing the plumbing that sources that dashboard. And I just want you to be a little more careful with that, especially if that one report might be sourcing multiple dashboards, because let's say that a report is sourcing multiple dashboards and you clone the dashboard and you think to make a change, you could actually be breaking something else. So you may want to create a separate set of copies of those source reports if you're making structural changes. One other thing to note, and this is sort of a funny one that I sort of discovered along the way prepping for today, I sort of forgotten this over the years, that if you clone a dashboard, the running user becomes you. So suddenly, if you're an admin in your system, you may not see anything. You may need to actually go reset the running users so that the appropriate data is pulled in. All right. So I did include a screenshot here just showing that you can actually, while looking at an existing dashboard, if you edit the dashboard, you can go into an existing component and you can click the little X. Yeah, it's an X. And you can actually change the plumbing. You can select a different source report, but just know that it's basically as if you're starting fresh. So it's kind of an easy way to delete and add a new component just by changing the source report. All right, so a couple of topics. One of them is just this color palette and theme. So with the move to Lightning, we were given 14 color palettes. We were also given the light theme and a dark theme. Maybe we already had the light theme. They gave us the dark theme. So the entire dashboard can be light or dark. The entire dashboard can be these 14 color palette items. Now, individual components also give us the option to be light or dark. So you can see here how drastic the difference is. These are the same two components. And this is dark theme with a watermelon. And this is the light theme with, I think it's fire down at the bottom. So this is under, when you edit the dashboard, it's under the properties, the little gear. All right, so Pablo asked the question, pretty sure I know the answer, but want to triple check. If I set up a dashboard to run as me, anyone with access to the dashboard folder will see all the components exactly as me. But if they try to drill down into specific components, they may be restricted. Yes, that's exactly right, Pablo. So the running user is the person through whose eyeballs we're seeing the data. It's through their data permissions. So if you think of like the mailroom guy in your company, the mailroom guy may not normally even see any opportunities, but if the mailroom guy is given access to a dashboard folder that has a dashboard in it where the running user is the VP of sales, then the mailroom guy will see her level of permissions. He'll see everything that she sees. So it is exactly what you wrote in your question there. So a couple of other things that we might consider: component titles, subtitles, and footers. Really we should be clear of what it is that we're looking at. When reviewing the, I used a couple of the pre-configured dashboards to do makeovers today, and I realized that some of the titles don't make sense. Like this one's fine for closed opportunities, but there's a fiscal year to date open pipeline. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. It would, like, the pipeline is everything in the future that's open. It wouldn't have anything to do with the year to date. And they're just odd things that you see over time. That title is just drawn from the underlying report title. We really should try to adjust it if we are making changes that alter its essence on the dashboard. So the title can be up to 80 characters. It's in the big font at the top, the subtitles right below it. Oddly, it's small font, it can only be 40 characters, and then the footer can be 255 characters. However, what happens with that is it gets truncated. So in Classic, it used to wrap. In Lightning, it gets truncated, which you've just got to control the sizing of your component. I would not have the dog wag the tail. Do not size your component based on the footer. I would size your footer based on the component. Yes, so Pablo, that's exactly right. That if you there's a couple of concepts there with the running user and having the source reports using the My filter, and you can actually go one step further than you're pointing out in your question in the chat, that the running user, you can have it be dynamic so that it runs as if it's running the underlying My based on whoever's looking at the dashboard. So there's a couple of cool things we can do with the running user. All right, so a couple of other concepts. Please, when you add components to a dashboard, they are not size optimized. You can see here this component here. This is the default size. And if you hover over the component that gets added to the dashboard, you see the scroll bars. And sometimes you see scroll bars vertically and horizontally, which really means this is not sized correctly. So I'd say it suggests one of two things: either make the component wider so that it shows all the data, or make it like a top 10 list or a top 7 list. And you could do that through the max groups displayed. So either or, I do not suggest leaving scroll bars. There might be some some use cases that are on the outside. A couple of other things. When Salesforce introduced Lightning, it introduced 9-column dashboards. A couple of years later, they introduced 12-column dashboards. The default is, when you create a new dashboard, is a 12-column dashboard. Please use 12-column dashboards. It just gives you a lot more control over the spacing, the real estate on the dashboards. You can, if you edit a dashboard, go into properties, you can see if it's currently a 9-column, and you can easily switch it to a 12-column. So, just a couple of other concepts. When I'm adding things to a dashboard, I like the idea of immediately hovering and seeing, are there scroll bars? I will try to size optimize. I'll often see how small I can make it without things falling off. So the footer might fall off, the subtitle might fall off, things just start falling off, the data starts to get too small, and then maybe make it a little bit bigger again. I really like that idea, that active resizing. I would suggest add your components to a dashboard, size them as you go, and then finally arrange them on the dashboard. And you might have some things that don't quite fit. They might look odd, and maybe you just make it a little bigger than it should be, just so that it fits the way you want. I mentioned earlier that one of the folks on our team, one of the consultants, really likes to leave spaces where appropriate. So you can see an example here, the screenshot on the bottom, where there's just an empty column. So one of the 12 columns is empty. And in this case, I've grouped items that are open pipeline. Maybe this might be lead data on the left and opportunity data on the right, or something like that. But you can go ahead and use spaces like that. We don't have to jam everything in. So there are 11 types of components. You can see the top here. Rather than going into detail into each one, we have a separate dojo that we did that. I'll just point out a few highlights about each. So like a horizontal bar chart, what's great about these is you tend to be able to see the full text without truncation, and you can even make the component wider to see that full text. These are really great for top 10 lists. These are nice to consider at showing the stacked version as well. So if you have a second grouping on your report, you could use this one here, which is the stacked horizontal bar chart. So with the horizontal bar chart, we can show up to 2 groupings. The groupings could be side by side. If you wanted to show it that way, that makes it a taller component. We can display up to 4 measures as long as they're the same data type. So I could show, this looks like this is some of the amount here, but if I had other, let's say it was the sum of cost, I could have that show, that literally just show side by side. So these are absolutely not size optimized when you add them to your dashboard. You do want to hover and look for scroll bars and maybe resize. So it's interesting here, we can add the second grouping. This is in the properties for horizontal bar chart. We can also add a second measure, add up to 4 measures as long as it's the same data type. If you have something that isn't the same data type, you could, for example, let's say that I was showing record count and I also wanted to show amount. So record count is a number, the amount is a currency. What I could do is back on the source report, use a row level formula and literally just change the data type to a number. And then I could put them both on the same dashboard. So there's some tricks like that in that interplay between the dashboard component and its source report, where you can sort of maneuver data to be usable. So the stacked one, there are a couple of cool things we can do. We can stack it to 100%. So this is showing the proportion of these, stretched out to 100%. Phone versus email. So the high, medium, low priority, it's et cetera in this top right screenshot here. This is with just the base numbers not stacked to 100%. And maybe there's a reason for emphasis that you choose to stack it to 100%. We can use 2-level sorting here. We can really get the information to show the way that we want. I prefer to put the legend on the bottom. If you leave the legend by default, it's over on the right, you're kind of wasting space. And oftentimes the chart itself is really quite small. Whereas if you put that legend on the bottom, as long as there aren't too many values, it really optimizes the space better. So the palette sets the colors. If you were doing this on a pick list where you overrode the colors, that doesn't work. The palette sets the colors. We are limited to just showing 2 groups, but I'm okay with that. I'd love to have 3, but 2 is okay. So vertical bar charts, these are great for a single grouped report with a few values. These are also great for time series. So you've got a time series across the top. I've only got 3 groupings here, but we tend to look left to right with time. So July, August, September, those months are in sequence left to right. What happens with a vertical stack bar or vertical bar is, depending on how long these names are, these are industries, they might be put on an angle, depending on how many groupings there are. They might also be truncated. All right, so Marianne wrote, subscriptions are a great way to auto refresh data since users forget to click that button on the dashboard. Great idea. There is a limit. You can only have 5 subscriptions. So you're absolutely right, Marianne. It's also useful when using lightning tables. Lightning tables go blank after 7 days. So if 7 days has passed since the last refresh, they just go blank. You have to physically refresh it. So you could set a subscription on a dashboard where you have a lightning table and set it to at least every 7 days, and then it'll always show that information without having to click refresh. All right, let's keep going. So the vertical stack bar chart. So this vertical bar chart, vertical stack bar chart, I really like these a lot. I like the striations. Again, whether it's a time series or something like this, I wouldn't want to go too many more groupings. This is a lot of groupings. You can see that they're shown on a diagonal and some of them are actually truncated. I probably could make this taller so that more of the text would show, but it feels like a lot of groupings here. So the line chart is one that I think a lot of people avoid. These are great for showing the changes in values over time. So what we have here are cases open by month priority this year. And we have 3 different priorities, high, medium, and low. And we have July, August, and September. And these are the 3 lines. So it looks like the low priorities, most of our cases, thankfully, are low priority. Whereas the high priority ones are just the lowest at the bottom. So these, this gives you kind of a cool option where we can do cumulative values. So this looks like this one is set to cumulative values where each month is adding to the one before it. We can also specify a custom range if we needed to on the line charts. I don't use these a lot. I think I see them just get really, really busy really fast if you have too many lines, etc. So the donuts, this is great when you have multiple groupings and you want to show the proportion of a single value for each grouping against the total and the total amount. So the donut replaced the pie chart, and the donut gives us the grand total. We can actually turn that off if you don't want to show the grand total in the middle. I think that these end up being used sort of inappropriately, whether it's too many groupings or for something that really could be best shown in another way. So I think this is kind of a nice example here where we've got high, medium, and low priorities, and we can essentially see the proportions between them. So the donut, again, shows the grand total, shows the percentages, and then we might also want to move this legend over here that's defaulted to the right. We may want to put it at the bottom, again, just so that that donut shows up a little bit larger. A couple of gotchas here. The default is to show max value of 6. The funnel does the same. So let's say that you had 10 different priorities, which would be a lot. It's going to default to show you 6, and it's going to combine small groups into other. And that you really don't want that. So that's true on a donut and also on a funnel. These end up with a ton of white space on the left and right. They can often be made quite a bit smaller, and the donut itself stays the same size. All right, so metrics, these show the grand total of a report. So you could create all these columns, you could have all these groupings, you could do all sorts of stuff on the source report. It doesn't care, it just needs the grand total. So when you use a metric, the default on using a metric is a shortened value, whereas I kind of like to see the full value. You can see the rounding in effect here, that this is showing 245 million when the actual number is 245,013,000. Where that gets to be a problem, especially in sales, is it looks like somebody made their number when actually it's just been rounded up, and they didn't actually make their number. I like to show the full values myself. One other thing about the metrics is we can do the red, yellow, greens if you want. You can also click on these colors and you can just swap around the colors. You can use millions of colors. So the default, for whatever weird reason, it always uses 33 and 67, which is almost is useful about 0% of the time. If I had up to 100, whatever it was, then maybe it's useful. But just keep in mind that the default when you add a metric is not super useful. So Russell asked the question, can you clarify palette sets color is used, the Picklist color is set by value if used, if neither, then system default. So what did I write here? Was that for the last one? Palette sets the color. Yeah, so with Picklists, and I think I've forgotten over time, Russell. I've forgotten over time. So in the olden days, within Salesforce, with Picklist, we were given the ability to specify colors to use in charts. That does not apply to all 11 component types. Some of them just ignores it. So a gas gauge is a specific example. The metric would be another example. And I've just forgotten over time. So I apologize, Russell. I should send out that list again. I think I tweeted it out a couple of years ago. Which ones specifically actually use the underlying Picklist colors. So Karen asked a question. So your thoughts, comments, dynamic database limitations, frustrating. Dynamic dashboard limitation, yes, it's really, so I think the unlimited edition, you get to have 10. And I thought that you could add more, but maybe that's one of the ones you can add more. I've just heard a lot of frustration around that one. So that's probably one we can't add more still. So the last couple of ones, the gas gauge, this also, just like the metric shows you the grand total, it shows you red, yellow, greens. Please, 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 you do not have to do 33 and 67. You can do more. Personally, I think that there are a couple of different philosophies. Some people set the goal all the way over here, let's say like at 400 million. Or others will say, you're not in the green until you actually hit the goal. So there's probably two different camps on this, where the target should be. But just one point is, you don't have to have this be a third red, a third yellow, a third green. You can move them around. You can also show the percentages. You can show the total amount and have it show as a full number if you wish as well. So there are two types of gauges available now. There is the newer one called a dynamic gauge. Typically what we do in that case is create a custom object and pull the data in from a custom object to set that high threshold goal. And then from there, you use percentages to say where the red and green should be off of that high watermark.
There's a question, is it possible to change the currency used from US dollar to another denomination?
So currencies are controlled in 3 places in Salesforce. You have an org level currency, each user has a default currency, and then each record has a currency. There are some controls built into reports. So in a multi-currency org, there are some controls built into the reports. But every now and then, like when I spoke to a user group in Uruguay, I actually went and I changed my org's currency to the Uruguayan currency, and I changed my user currency, and basically everything was changed in that sense. I'm going to guess your question, Tracy, is probably a little bit more specific to say the dollar amount and not USD. So in the metric, how do I get it to say the dollar amount and not USD? How do I get it to say the dollar amount and not USD? I guess I'll need to follow up with you, Tracy, on that one just to understand specifically what you're asking. Oh, here you go. You want to keep it as the dollar, but show it as USD 31. I'm gonna have to play with that one, Tracy, to fully understand it. All right, so for funnels, you want to use a funnel chart when you have multiple groupings in some kind of an ordered set. So stage, or like lead opportunity stages or lead statuses, are a good example of a funnel, and that's probably where I've seen it used the most. Something that's moving through a process, and we think of the sales funnel. I've had more heads of sales ask, "Can you just show it so it looks like a funnel?" Or over the years. So we can show the values, we can show the percentages. This is one where the default legend position I think looks really good. Throwing this over on the right. There are some gotchas. Shame on Salesforce that the max values displayed by default is 6. Most of us have more than 6 opportunity stages. And you may not notice that it's truncated to just showing 6, and it's combining the small groups into others. So that one's kind of lousy. Scatter plots, these are great for showing correlations. I won't spend a lot of time on it, though I thought to show 2. This is where most people stop. When you first create a scatter plot, it just shows you a bunch of balls diagonally, right? And the reason is that it's using the same x-axis as the y-axis, and a lot of people stop here. They can't figure it out. And what you really need is just a different x-axis or different y-axis. In this case, over here on the right, I did use a different y-axis. The reason why I have 3 lines in this case is that I used the sum of the amount and the average amount. And there are cases where the average is the sum because there's only one item in the grouping, and it's creating these odd lines. This is one where there are perfect use cases. Joined reports is a good example of where you might have data that you can correlate nicely. Here's an example over on the right of data that's coming in from a joined report. So the last of the component types is the lightning table. This one is very special. It's great for showing data. We can show up to 10 columns. We can show up to 200 rows if we want. We can show individual records. We can also show group data. If we show either of those, we can add a summary row at the bottom. We can do conditional highlighting. I really like to use these to just add a little bit more information. Maybe it's for, we have a whole bunch of sales information that's nice charts, and then we have one thing that are like deals that have a problem with them. or clients that are unhappy, or something where we might just want to see the actual data listed out with a couple more columns of meaningful information. So there's a lot that you can do with these. There is a gotcha that these go blank after 7 days. All right, so Sherry very kindly shared something, and I hope this is anonymized enough. I tried to zoom out, but Sherry shared a dashboard that she had worked on, and this dashboard has 20 components on it. So you can see this up here. And there was a couple of cool things that I really liked that she did with this dashboard. And then there's some things that we just talked through. So we probably talked for about an hour. And, like one of the first things that jumped out at me was that part of the items are dark theme, part of the components are dark theme. So there are 6 that are dark theme, and then there are a corresponding 6 that are light theme. And one of the things that we talked about, because this is such a busy dashboard, of actually maybe parsing those out and creating a second dashboard with those 12 elements side by side, perhaps. So literally white theme and dark theme. And thank you, Marianne. Yes, 20 components is the max on a dashboard. Absolutely. Now, there is a little known fun fact too, that you could create what's called an app page, and you could list more than one dashboard on that page. So you could get multiple dashboards on the same page. You could do the same on a home page as well if you wanted to. But back on this case, right away, there was sort of this opportunity. We could parse these out and stick them somewhere else. There were 12 that are 6 and 6, 2 different lines of business that we could focus on perhaps in a separate dashboard. A couple of other just thoughts right away. One, when I see a donut like this, and I'm showing it a little bit down here, donuts show you the proportion between different groups. This one has so many different groups that's completely lost, the ability to see the proportions. The other thing with this particular one is that it's showing accounts over here on the right. And this is purposefully zoomed out, sort of anonymized, zoomed out. I did that on purpose. But just to point out that it's like the accounts are over here and the chart is over here. There's so much distance between these that it's almost lost. And I think in this case, and I'll show, I did a few mock-ups and did a little bit of makeover work on a few of these components. A horizontal bar might actually show this, and maybe grouped with the highest group, sort of descending, might look the best. There are a couple of other ones, like this one in the top center is a time series. Time series tend to best be shown vertically instead of horizontally. A couple of other items here, like funnels, that maybe the funnel isn't the best use case. This is showing projects and individual projects in a funnel form, where we might choose another format for that. So I'll just show a couple of examples of these, and I'm so appreciative of Sherry taking the time to talk through a dashboard together. So what I did is I recreated some of the elements from that dashboard, and I just thought to show alternate examples of one. So, that one it probably had 3 times as many striations in it. Clearly, there was going to be a scroll bar in the legend. There's just too many items in that. Probably a donut is best with like 10 items or less, some number like that, where you can actually make sense of the proportions between them. What I thought in this case, because there were so many groupings, is that you could have a tall horizontal bar. If it's important for you to show all of those groupings, you might, instead of having them where somebody has to scroll and try to make sense of the colors, there's only so many colors it shows, so the colors end up getting repeated as well. Instead, doing a horizontal bar. And what's nice here is that you can actually see the numbers. Here, you'd have to hover over to see some of these numbers. The numbers, the slivers in the pie are too small to see the numbers, so you'd actually have to hover over where you can actually display them on the horizontal bar. Another one that I pointed out is the time series, and the time series was set vertically. And I think in the case of the one that she had, this dashboard's been used for a couple of years, so there are quite a lot of quarters. I think, when you're first setting up a dashboard, you think, you're setting it up and maybe there's a year's worth of data. Well, now a bunch of years have gone by. Now we have a lot of quarters. So we might even want to go back and trim down the number of quarters displayed. But I think definitely, instead of showing vertically, unless there's a very specific reason, we could actually show them horizontally and show, left to right with the time series. Another example of a donut was a top 5 partners. And one of the challenges with the donut with long account names, and I just made up these account names, is they end up getting truncated when they're in this donut format. And it's sort of hard to associate the account name with which, you get the colors, but it's sort of like it's almost too far apart, whereas we could use a horizontal bar. Now, I don't want so many of these to be horizontal bars. That's another consideration. But just to show that you can actually see the full account name, and then you can see that data, immediately off to the right as well. The same is true for one of the funnels that was using a project name. I listed the account name, but in essence, it's a project name, and the projects are truncated. Unless people know the truncated name and what it refers to, I'd suggest like the actual project name is important, plus whatever that data amount is, and we might sort it descending. So essentially you have like a top 10 list, or however many you want to show. There was another one that was top 5 partners, and it was showing it based on something called alignment score. And I thought in that case to show that as a table, and maybe to throw some additional information in there. So this chart basically has the left column and the right column, and we're showing it descending on the alignment score. And maybe there's some other columns of information, such as who owns the account, or what's this other field called total reach, that we could display there. So I spread these out in sort of an odd way just to keep them so that I knew which one applied to which one. This is not a spacing I'm recommending, although it doesn't look terrible. All right.
There's a question about whether you can color code horizontal bars. It just looks like none of the components that you had added did that.
So in general, no, we can't color code the horizontal bars. We can use the 14 colors in the color palette. If we have a second grouping, there would be a second color that could be shown, but in general, no, we don't have that level of control. So I took a couple of dashboards and just thought to make a, before moving on, when I met with Sherry, we had such a good conversation. Even before looking at anything together, we talked through who's the dashboard for, what decisions or actions does this dashboard support, how often is it used, what devices. If somebody's only looking at something on an iPad, we might set it up a little differently. I'm always curious, as somebody sat in the room while the dashboard's been in use, how confident are they in the underlying data, things like that. I think that there's probably a good set of questions, and the answers to the questions may have changed since the dashboard was originally created. And that's where you may end up breaking up a dashboard into multiple dashboards. If it originally supported one meeting that the team met every week, and now that meeting's changed into 2 meetings, then we may want to cleave off parts of that dashboard and create another dashboard. All right. Sorry, I'm not keeping up as full on with the chat, but I do have 2 more makeovers I want to show you. In the pre-configured Sales Cloud dashboard pack on the App Exchange, there are 4 dashboards, and I thought to talk through 2 of them. There's one called the KPI Makeover and the KPI Key Performance Indicators. And this is what it looks like to start with. There's a lot of white space. Obviously, the gas gauge isn't appropriate for this data set. And there's just a couple of other things that I thought, we could probably do better with this. What I came up with is down here on the bottom, and it's obviously a little bit more compact. Part of how I made it more compact is this original dashboard had 9 columns. It was one of the older format dashboards. And so immediately when I changed it to 12 columns, I have more real estate to work with. Clearly updating the gauge was meaningful instead of having this big silly green thing across the top. Replacing the donut. So this, in fact, there are two donuts. So this top one is fiscal year-to-date revenue by quarter. I don't think that time series should be shown in a donut. I mean, maybe, but what happens when more quarters go by and suddenly you have 10 of these? In this case, I changed it to this one in the center here. The vertical bar, really does well left to right for time series. And we also have the record count. I added a second axis showing the record count as well. And a lot of what I did here was get rid of white space. You can see how small these metric numbers are simply by removing the words drill into report to see details, which really isn't that useful. Literally, it's a link right below. A human can tell that's a link and click on it. By removing those words, the font got quite a bit larger on this metric. I also thought that they could be stacked, and over on the left, what I did was put the this sort of closed business items on the left, and that's true of this one as well. So all of these on the left, and then for components that have open opportunities, I put those over on the right. And the grouping where you put things on the dashboard, putting like things together can be meaningful as well. So just to show, so that was the KPI. So this is what the starting point was. This one also had a weird extra bit of space that wasn't being used. And it's fine, but why don't we use the space and not make it so tall? Another concept with spacing, you've probably heard, if you've read a newspaper, the idea of being below the fold. So when you first look at a newspaper, everything on the top of the newspaper is above the fold, and then there's the fold, and then there's the stuff hidden on the bottom. With dashboards that have a ton of components, there's stuff below the fold, and people may literally never scroll down. So, there's sort of a value to sort of economizing the space. We have so much white space here. We don't need all this white space. And then also pulling things up. So so that same dashboard, if I go to the Makeover version, I've pulled it up quite a bit. This seems ridiculously large, so I might not need that to be quite that large, but this is our year-to-date revenue, so maybe that is important. And then, I've got these three metrics, and the font's a little bigger with each of them. And then you've got the time series that was a donut. I don't know why it would be a donut. And then one of the other donuts I made into this table, and just showing the additional column as well. What's nice about a table is that you can add the grand total of the table. I think when I'm looking at closed business plus commit plus best case plus maybe what's the other one? Oh gosh, somebody's going to name it really quickly. Actually, Pablo will know the answer to that. So it's best case, and isn't that funny? Most likely, no, there's another word that's used in the forecast category, the default forecast. After 17 years, you think it'd be etched on my forehead, but anyway, I left this taller in case we had that extra forecast category added in there. But I like this instead of a donut, again, because we're seeing the close. That's what we've actually closed, and then below it, you've got your commit, your best case, and then you've got the total below it, below that. There was one other really goofy thing with this one, that the stages in the funnel weren't in order. Actually, these are not in order either. Oh my goodness, look at that. So do you see the stages here? We have proposal price quote below negotiation review. So these must be sorted by the opportunity amount. So let's go ahead and fix that. So that to me is a no-no. So yeah, we've summed it by the amount, not by the stage. And I don't want them descending, I want them ascending. So I've got prospecting at the top, then qualification, and so on. So negotiation, that's what a funnel means, is the stages in order. So this example, this dashboard actually had the sort order based on the amount. Let's go ahead and click save on that. The last one that I thought to show you is this clean your room dashboard. And in the clean your room dashboard, again, there was some weird space over here on the right. It was a 9-column dashboard. I changed it to a 12. I changed the theme and the palette. I just thought to go with a dark color here, and I made it into the watermelon palette just because. I updated the gauge and resorted the funnel on this one. So this one has prospecting at the bottom. Again, that doesn't make any sense. It should be, when you have a funnel, it should always be in the list of stages or statuses in that order. The column, the tables, this one has 2 columns. This one has 3 columns. This one has 2 columns. I figured we could do better than that. Maybe show a little bit more information, maybe show a subtotal. There's a lot of white space in these. We don't really need all that white space. It's amazing how if you make a like a funnel less, if you make it more narrow, the funnel size doesn't change. It just has less white space until you get pretty narrow. Then the funnel finally will get smaller. The same is true for a gas gauge. The other thing that I did here was I grouped the like components. So I put all the revenue stuff for closed business on the left and all the open opportunity stuff on the right. And then there are some issues way over on the right that I have in here. So let's go take a look. This is what the source one looks like. And it's fine. There are two components that have no data in them. There's also a horizontal bar that's listing accounts, and that didn't really make a ton of sense to me. Your top 10 accounts by revenue, it just didn't make a ton of sense. So what I did was, instead of having a vertical bar, I made it into a horizontal bar, and I think it just shows the data a lot better than this does. So let's jump over to that. The other thing that I did here was just add a filter. And let's say that there are 4 industries that we really care about to drill down on. I created a 5th one that says not equal to those ones above it. So sort of a little trick you can do with filters. You can only have 50 distinct filter values. I don't want 50. There are 4 industries I care about. There's one. I thought to add one for all the ones that aren't those 4. Like, what does the rest of our business look like? So kind of an interesting thing to throw in there. But all right, so this has been fun playing with some dashboards. As far as like recapping, probably a lot of us, I didn't even realize how bad this kitchen looked like. This looks like a nicer kitchen over here on the right. We can absolutely practice by using the save as, and just you can work on any dashboard that way, move things around, resize them, try out different components. We talked about the surface makeover. There's a bunch of topical things, the color palettes, the themes, sizing, arrangement, spacing, the sorting, footers, subtitles, and titles. I think it's really important that we spend time on picking the best component for the job. There is a page in help. Maybe you can, if you didn't already drop that into the chat, Kyle. The page in help, I think it was one of the middle ones on the list. Thank you. Yeah, for the dashboard components types. That can be helpful, and just, there are sort of recommendations for what you do with each of the types. And I think that's an important thing, to try to stay within the sweet spot of each one of these component types. It's not an absolute thing. And this is like in Sherry's example, we talked through some of them, and I think she's absolutely right. Like some of them, it doesn't fit within the perfect definition of what that component type might be used for, but she had good reasons for using them as well. So we talked about structural makeovers, changing the source reports. That's a little more heavy duty. So, if you say clone, save as, and work on something, that isn't impacting the source reports. But if you get down to that source report level, you just want to be a little more careful, a little more conscientious about what you're doing. And keep in mind that over time, it's very normal for a team to just have so much on a dashboard that you actually split it up into different dashboards. It's very, very normal. So we've got a couple of events coming up. So next week, I'll host a group. These are OpFocus events, how to provide an accurate picture of revenue reporting after major go-to-market changes. So a lot of us have changes that happen every year in our go-to-market motion. Suddenly we're focused on tiering of the account. Suddenly we're focused on our global regions. We're introducing new products, stuff like that. And how does that impact revenue reporting? So we're going to talk about that. And then the week after, we've got operations pitfalls during post-merger integration. So probably the most complex work we do as Salesforce consultants is when one company acquires another or acquires 5 others and rolls those into a single Salesforce org. So both Jim and Susan worked at a company where they acquired 23 companies and rolled them into a single instance. I'm teaching 2 classes coming up, June 13th to the 17th. There's the OpFocus Salesforce Administration course. We also have the Salesforce Reporting Workshop, June 27th and 28th. And you can find information about that on opfocus.com/training. The next Dojo session is June 8th. Ezra is one of my favorite people on the planet. He's hilarious. He was a data architect for Salesforce. He was the data architect for Dell Computer, knows a ton, has written all kinds of tools, just a neat guy. And I thought to invite him to share stuff he finds interesting. All right, so I didn't keep up with all the chat, all your questions, but I can try to answer some of them after. Jeff asked the question, will the flow on the dashboard in a mobile device be a consideration? Oh, interesting. So so there's probably 2 different considerations. One, with a dashboard subscription, they put the components one on top of another. And then on a mobile device, I'm trying to remember how that order is controlled. I'd need to see it to be sure about how that order is controlled. So it's probably based on how the items are added to, how the components are added to the dashboard, but I'm not entirely sure, Jeff. So I'm sorry, I don't have that answer in the top of my head. All right, Sherry asked the question, who's with me wishing they had the rest of the day free to make over all their dashboards? No, that's great. Thank you. That's kind. So Chris asked the question, is there a way in Salesforce to know how frequently a dashboard is being used and by whom? The only thing we really have is the last refresh date. So we really don't have a use of the tool being tracked. So I don't know if, what is the name of the security tool? Is it Shield? That doesn't sound right. I don't know if there's a monitoring of the use of the dashboards that way. But it's not perfect, Chris, to work off last refreshed, especially if there's a subscription or if just somebody on your own team might have run the dashboard the day before and it hadn't been run for 5 years before that. It's not very helpful that way. Another way you can tell if it's really old is if the running users left the company. So anyway, thanks so much for spending the time together today, guys. And I hope to see you on June 8th. And I look forward to hearing about your success doing dashboard makeovers. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Thank you, everyone.